Hey everyone, Scott Mantz here. Thank you so much for joining us for Landmark Theater's Retro Replay Screening Series 1999, the year that changed cinema, featuring Election. And joining us for the conversation on Election, I'm so honored and excited to be joined by actors Reese Witherspoon and Matthew Broderick and writer director Alexander Payne. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy 25th anniversary to Election. This is very, very exciting.
Thanks, Scott.
So, Alexander, the script is the thing. How did you and Jim Taylor come to adapt Election? What was it about the book that made you go, we got to do this?
It's funny. The producers, Albert Berger and Ronnie Yerxa, had sent me at the time it was an unpublished manuscript. And I didn't read it for at least 6 months after they sent it to me because it was a high school movie, and there had been a spate of high school movies in the 90s. And I thought, I'm a film snob. Me make a high school movie? Oh, God forbids. But finally, Albert kept saying, just read it, will you? And when I read it, it was like a thunderbolt. I like first person movies. I like voiceover in movies, so I liked the formal challenge that it suggested. And then, as often when I read scripts or books, usually, yeah, I'll read and it's like, oh, good, this is human and good, and I believe this could happen in real life. Please don't have a contrivance. Please don't pull out a gun or spies or some garbage. And it just stayed really human and kind of pathetic and funny throughout.
Uh-huh.
So I sent it to Jim Taylor, my co-writer. He agreed, and we were off to the races.
Off to the races indeed. Reese, I would love to get your take on the first time you read the screenplay for Election, your take on Tracy Flick, and was Tracy even the character that you went after?
Well, when I read the script, I was just completely mesmerized by Tracy Flick, and I was determined to play her. I had seen Alexander's movie, Citizen Ruth, at Sundance, and was such a huge fan of what he had created with that film. And so I understood, his sense of humor and his sense of satire. And so my memory is that I came in wanting to play Tracy Flick, and I remember the audition in front of Alexander and coming in somewhat in character because I heard sort of a voice in my head that had an accent, and she was from Omaha, um and I remember saying to him, I really want to play this part, and you can audition other people, but you're going to pick me.
Oh, wow. Alexander,
And
what was your take?
if you don't pick me, you're mistaken.
She was Reese Witherspoon even then.
What was that audition like, Alexander? Do you have any vivid
I,
memories?
as I recall, it wasn't even an audition. It was a meeting. We sat at a table somewhere in West LA and talked. And I do remember you're saying, yes, I want this part, and you can meet other people. It'll probably be me. And you were right. But I had seen Man in the Moon. And of course, I knew of some of her intervening work. So I knew she was a, up and comer. Um, and one of the things that impressed me too was I think she was 20, 19 or 20 at the time, but I still believe she could be of high school age. I really wanted, all the high school characters to be believably in high school, not like movie high school. And she was right. I met no one who even came close to what I felt she could do with the part.
Matthew, I got to say, when I first saw Election, it was at a really early screening on the Paramount lot in the beginning of April of 1999. In fact, I didn't know anyone who had even seen the film, and there were only like a few other entertainment journalists in the room. And one of the first things I thought about when I was getting to see, Jim McAllister was, boy, this is such a polar shift from probably the previous time you made a movie about high school. What was your take on Election and your take on Mr. McAllister?
Um, well, I remember reading it and just being I got sent the script somehow. My memory is that the part wasn't really available, or it wasn't like an offer. It was just, you should read this, even though it's probably going a different way, but it's fun to read.
Yeah.
And I read it, and immediately was in a rage that I never get scripts like that one. Um, because I just thought it was so good. It was so funny and so real. And just immediately, it was not an effort to read. It was an absolute, I loved reading it. And then I think I watched Citizen Ruth probably after that, which I also thought was wonderful. And so I thought mostly just how good it was. And I thought it was a very good part, but I don't know that I knew exactly like how I didn't, wasn't like immediately, I'm him, right? Maybe it was, but I remember meeting Alexander we had food at like the Sony lot. Is that right, Alexander? Do you remember
Yeah,
that?
you were shooting Godzilla,
Godzilla.
and
Godzilla.
I
Yeah.
went to set, and then we had lunch together.
Yes, and I took off my rain-soaked military uniform and talked about election. And I was so happy to meet you and to be considered for something like that. It was a real treat for me.
Alexander, the way that you and Jim adapted the story, getting the right tone, what were the challenges to get the right tone as a, dark comedy, as a satire, and also just to have especially Tracy and McAllister, and even Paul Meltzer, the character played by Chris Kine, everybody's so fully realized. What were the challenges to get it just right? And then what were the first conversations you especially had with Reese and Matthew about it?
Well, to paraphrase the last king of France, the tone, c'est moi. Uh, that's just kind of the tone that Jim and I go for, at least that kind of that brand of kind of anarchic human satire we were doing earlier in our careers. The challenge though maybe was because Tom Perrotta's novel very much suggests this story, but his tone is kind of more wistful and wise and literary. And for Jim and me, we saw the potential to be able to sort of taffy yank the tone and the characters into something more comic. And then the biggest challenge was the original ending, because originally we shot an ending that was in the book, which was kind of a very kind of thoughtful, melancholy coming together of Jim McAllister and Tracy Flick. But the movie, up until that point, had turned out much funnier than the novel had. So by the time we got to this melancholy ending, it was disappointing. It didn't feel in character with the rest of the film. So after a bunch of tests and kind of figuring out what to do, Jim and I sat down and thought, well, had this been an original, what might we have come up with? And then that's the ending you see in the film.
So, Reese, I would love to hear how you approached playing Tracy. What informed your approach to playing her? What were your points of connection for her? Because it's such an assured, strong performance. Like I feel like you really, really got her.
Well, I think a big part of the performance was actually just about Omaha. It's a love letter to Alexander's home city and home state of Nebraska and all of those, wonderful Midwestern people who live inside of it, who have such strong sense of values and ideas. And even if you have ambition inside of those kind of communities, you're, you know, you're deeply connected to the history of the place and pride of being from the Midwest. And so that was a big part of it as we shot in Omaha in real high schools, in an active real high school. So the extras were real high school students and
Wow, wow.
teachers. And so it gave you a sense of place and just sort of the celebration of the mundane sort of, life as it was.
So Matthew, what about you? What informed your approach to play Mr. McAllister, and how did that approach maybe change a little after you all got together? Maybe you did a table read to help you, zero in better on the character.
Well, I think from talking to Alexander and Jim quite and getting to know them and Reese and all of us kind of hanging out and I remember the table read or some enormous table read with like everybody. And I thought it was everybody was so good. Even I shouldn't say even, but local people, uh, real students. I mean, everybody just seemed to get it, and it was hard to not feel you were in the right place. So, and then I guess I could very much sympathize with Jim's annoyance that somebody who's ambitious gets their stuff, and that he gets that mad at a young teenage girl is I thought was amusing. That he takes it that personally, that he would cheat, or it's so horrible. But I can see it happening.
Wow.
He
Wow.
gets, I guess he's a little obsessive. He's mostly a moral person, but not really.
Not in that case. Not that for sure.
And not in a lot of cases, actually, as you get to.
Well, that's
Yeah.
true. That's very, very true. Reese, what about that table read? Also
Oh,
like
and I can also just say, and also Reese was a big. The table read, also seeing Reese do that performance for the first time was quite an eye opener. It was stunning, and that helped a lot too.
do you remember that, Reese?
I have vague memories of it. I said, Alexander, can I try something that's sort of a little more comedic and broad? And I remember I did that, the voice and the jaw and the thing, and he brought my performance down for when we actually started shooting it. But I like to go for it in a table read, go big or go home. And but I remember being there. I remember being with Matthew and being so intimidated and so nervous that he was there because I've been such a fan of his work for so many years, and he inspired so much of my desire to want to be an actor. So it was to play his nemesis was very intimidating to say the least, but he was so game. And I have to say, I remember so many scenes we were shooting where Alexander would give us the most amazing direction that was like talking about everything from Shakespeare and Macbeth to National Geographic and animal behavior. And it was such fun. We just had fun. And I remember the scene where I had to tell Matthew that I had to tell Mr. McAllister that, or I just remember these confrontational scenes and like suppressing laughter because it was so funny. We were having just a blast playing these kind of funny characters.
It is funny. And one of the scenes that I really love is the scene where Mr. McAllister interrogates Tracy about the posters, about ripping the posters down. It's such a that the tension, but there's still some levity there. Alexander, what do you remember about filming that scene in particular? Because it's
I
like
remember asking for the water cooler. There's a water dispenser, like it's in a cop's office, like it's like a detective interviewing a perp, and he goes to get a cup of water, and it gave Matthew
That's
some.
break the tension, or to turn the screws.
Yeah, right.
what do you remember about filming that scene, Matthew? Because it's so great.
Oh, the water cooler.
Yeah. The water cooler.
Yeah. And the whole scene, I just thought it was funny to be, interrogating this young person. I don't know. It was really fun. Reese is right. We were laughing a lot, as I recall.
I just remember the very last line of her saying something basically intimating that she had slept with your friend and it was his fault that he was little.
Oh, it's horrible. Yeah, absolutely. I forgot. Yeah, terrible.
And I think certain older people, like you and your colleague, shouldn't be leching after their students, especially when some of them can't even get their own wives pregnant.
It was like suddenly this person that was a child
Yeah.
became a vindictive adult who was
Yeah.
manipulating this conversation. And it was this odd character that bridged adulthood and childhood.
Hmm.
One of my other favorite scenes is when they're doing the vote, and Tracy kind of peeks in, and the other student kind of just like looks up, and he like goes like this, and Tracy is like dancing around in the hall. What do you remember about filming that, Reese?
I remember I did it one take and I wasn't jubilant enough. And Alexander asked me to hop up and down like a human pogo stick.
Well, I thought that was in the script. She pogos.
My pogos. Yeah, but
You weren't pogoing enough.
I wasn't doing it right. And he was like, no, like I want you to jump up and down like a pencil. And so he did, and he was like, you
I
nailed it.
demonstrated it, which I couldn't do now because I have a torn meniscus.
Matthew, when Mr. McAllister gets bit by the stung by the bee, and his eye really swells up over the next few scenes before it kind of dissipates towards the end. Uh, what was that makeup process like, and how did that, how does sort of makeup in this film or any other film sort of elevate your performance beyond what you've even sort of prepared?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the bee sting is not in the book, by the way. I
No,
think
that's Jim Taylor thought of that.
you guys added that. Yeah. It was very elaborate. There were four different levels of swelling on my eye.
Oh God.
It took a long time to do, and he was extremely careful about making sure what level of swelling it was at different times, and it helped a lot. It was just automatically amusing, and I couldn't see out of that eye, which is strange.
I
Reese,
like the moment where he holds the cold champagne bottle to the eye.
Yeah.
Reese, when you're immersed in a character like Tracy, do you try to stay in character as much as possible, or are you able to like just at the end, the scene's over, break it, and just go back to being Reese?
No idea. All I remember is that at the end of the movie, I had TMJ from holding my jaw so tight.
Oh, wow, wow, wow.
So I think I was happy to be
If
done.
if I can share a detail I remember about is, we'd call cut and she'd be Reese again. And then when it was time to shoot, she would wiggle her nose like Samantha Stevens. And it kind of helped. That was her auto cue to get back into Tracy Flick.
Wow.
Awareness.
I kind of like that. Yeah.
Oh,
It's magic.
I started doing that.
With a film like this, I'm really curious. So, with all the prep that you do, but like during a rehearsal, during a table read, or you're just trying to remember your lines the night before shooting the next day. So, Reese, I'm wondering if you're if you're trying to memorize your lines for a scene, and then you have it, okay, this is how I'm going to do the scene the next day. Then you go to the set, you're at the high school with the real students and the real teachers and Matthew and Chris and everybody. How does the cast elevate your performance beyond what you were even prepared to do?
I mean, being supported by Alexander and Jim and Matthew and Chris Klein and all these incredible people watching is it's it's helpful, but it's also terrifying. I mean, I always hurdle myself towards a performance like like going to throw myself off a cliff. But I feel like I'd rather do too much and then have Alexander say, "Hey, can you augment it this way or that way?" than do too little because like that's just boring. And but I remember that big speech where she had her campaign speech being a really fun moment to perform in front of the entire real high school. It's sort of looked on, I don't know. They didn't know what we were doing.
Right.
We didn't know what we were doing. We had no idea this movie was going to be so beloved. I mean, I remember seeing it for the first time and thinking, what is this movie? Do I like this girl? Do I not? Do I like
Oh,
Mr. McCall's?
yeah.
I
And
don't.
it's not as though it was a big hit when it came out.
It didn't. It wasn't. I mean, critics loved it, but
Right.
it got marketed. Thanks, Scott. It got marketed as like a teen comedy, and it's not to this day, people say, should I show my daughter that movie? She's a
No.
teenager. It's absolutely not.
I got to tell you, I remember that summer. I remember that summer. So American Pie opened in, I think, August. No, July. And Chris Klein was in that as well. And I remember talking to a friend of mine, and she says, "Oh, I loved American Pie. Well, I like Election." And I'm like, totally different movie. Totally different movie. Going back to what you said at the top of this conversation, Alexander. This is not a teen high school comedy at all. But when did you while you were filming during principal photography, Alexander, when did you start to really feel like you had something really special here?
You never really know. I mean, I thought it was funny. We had a blast shooting it. It was fall of '97 when we did principal photography, and um, it just all felt right. It felt good to me. It was a bear to wrestle in the editing room. We had Kevin Tent, the editor. My joke is, it's not a joke. We had two Christmas parties in the editing room, and then we had to tack on another 6 months or so um, to shoot that alternate ending. Matthew was busy. It took us a while to figure out exactly what to do. And then Matthew was shooting Inspector Gadget at the time. So we had to wait for him to wrap Inspector Gadget. So it was fun shooting. It was a challenge in the editing room, but I have to say, editorially it's the film I'm most proud of. I think I've made 8 feature films, and that's the one I can point to say it's not too long.
Well,
You know,
the other,
yeah, it
yeah.
has a very good shark-like rhythm. It just keeps moving forward, and you turn it on. You can start it in the middle and just keep watching because it just sort of grabs you and pulls you along.
I think also the brilliance of the editing, Alexander, is the way that you're able to balance, like, I think 4 different points of view throughout the course of the film, with the four main actors. I think
That's
it's brilliant.
the script and the editing,
Yeah.
and a bit of the kinetic visual style and kinetic editorial style was a bit. I had been kind of intoxicated by Casino, so there's some influence of Casino the first 40 minutes anyway on Election.
So, Matthew, what was it like to come back and shoot the new ending? Especially, what did you think of the new ending?
I thought it was very. I liked it. I did see a screening with the original ending. I remember, and much as I kind of liked it, I definitely could feel the audience some disappointment or something. It didn't, as Alexander said, it didn't belong to the rest of the movie enough. I guess they were on a different trajectory, and I thought the new ending really fixed that, and it was fun to shoot. We got to shoot in New York. I got to have my little apartment that's below ground, and I got to throw a slushy at Reese's car, which I enjoyed. And the natural his I thought it was an extremely clever way to end the movie, and it was great fun to reunite with everybody too.
So, Reese, I'm curious. When you first saw the film, the movie critics definitely loved it. I was definitely one of them. I still am. When For 2 things, when did you start to feel like it was catching on, over the years? And the second, Reese, is how was playing Tracy Flick a game changer for you with the roles that followed?
Oh, I couldn't get a job after this movie came out because everybody, all the studio heads thought I was that character.
Oh
And
my God.
it was hard. It took me like a year and a half to get traction again. And I had to audition with, in different ways. But ultimately, it was just an incredible moment in my career because it was kind of like a big launch for me comedically. And I wouldn't have gotten Legally Blonde if I hadn't have played Tracy Flick.
Mm.
The thing I think is really remarkable is how many people come up to me and talk about the character, and that she's indicative of this idea of American ambition, and that anything is possible for a woman in America. Um, and I think she's been compared to a lot of female political candidates in a lot of um, you know in ways that I think are really interesting. And it's also really interesting that there haven't been that many female political characters to point to other than Tracy Flick, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Veep. So it's an interesting way that we categorize women with ambition. And I always get curious about who she is and what she's doing now. Um, but also, then there's certain political candidates who have taken her entire speeches and used them for their own, and that's bizarre. So that's when I knew it had hit the cultural consciousness in a big way. Probably within, I mean, the fact that you make a movie and people still talk about it 25 years later is surprising
It's
and
A very
wonderful.
pleasant, it's a very good feeling.
It's a great
It's a lovely
feeling.
feeling.
It's a great feeling, and I think that's what you do it for, so that you make a impact, and that you describe something or show a part of life that people don't really normally see on film.
I got to ask, Reese, you asked, oh, I wonder what Tracy Flick is doing now. Is it possible that Tracy grew up to be Bradley Jackson?
I don't think
From the morning show.
I don't think that Tracy Flick, I don't know. I think she's probably still pretty Midwestern and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with a great love of her country.
Alexander, when did you start to feel like it was really catching on, that people were talking about it and coming up to you and be like, oh, I finally saw Election and I love the film.
I don't really remember. Maybe in the years since then, I remember my dad, I mean, the fact that Reese got a Golden Globe nomination and Jim Taylor and I got an Oscar nomination for the screenplay, like much later. It wasn't like now where if there's a prestige movie, they wait to release it in the fall. This had come out in April. So people had remembered it. And then I remember my dad sent me he had photocopied it and faxed it to me, USA Today survey of or Premiere Magazine, one of those, like the top reviewed films of 1999. Election had been number one.
Wow.
So despite the fact that it didn't make a whole lot of money upon first release, it cost 8 and made about 15 or 16 domestically. But in the years since, that's when that it has some staying power and that people still talk about it. I'll brag and say Barack Obama has told me twice it's his favorite political movie. And the fact that Tracy Flick, maybe not as much as Archie Bunker, but you hear the name Tracy Flick still in popular lexicon is really something.
Yeah, it really is. And the movie also was a winner of the Writers Guild Award for Best Adapted Screenplay and a winner of 3 Independent Spirit Awards for
Right, that's right.
Best
Got
Picture,
that.
Best Director, Best Screenplay. So definitely got a lot of love in other ways and over these years. Matthew, when you look back on Election, how proud are you of the movie? What does it mean to you 25 years later, especially, when you look at all the other great films that came out in 1999?
I don't know. I'm very glad I'm in it, and it was, I guess, it was a nice opportunity for me in film because I mostly played very likable types, and so it was a chance to show some other, sides of myself. And I just liked everybody I worked with, so I just think of it as one of the ones that I feel like it was fun to make and it was sort of fully realized. Like I don't look at it and think, oh well, that didn't quite come work the way we all wanted it to. This is one where it feels like it all fit.
What about you, Reese? What does it Election mean to you after all these years? What does it mean to you now? How proud are you that this is a film that obviously people are still very much talking about?
I still just feel so proud of it. And every time people come up to me and talk about it, I'm just beaming with pride and great memories of the times that we had together and my love of working with Alexander and Jim and Matthew. And we just had a blast. And you can tell, when things are made with joy and love and humor and pathos and empathy, and it just comes across, it comes on screen. And I feel really lucky that in this lifetime and in my career that I've gotten to have a shot at making something this indelible.
All right, Alexander, take us out. How proud are you? I know you mentioned you are proud of the film, but 25 years later, what does Election mean to you?
Yeah, like my comrades, I'm very proud of it and proud that people still mention it. And, I'll get like, oh, you're Alexander Payne. Yeah, I really like, what is it? What's the wine one sideways? And, oh, Nebraska, that was really funny. But election, I always get the but election. It's still the film I have to say I get the most compliments on, and especially from like film geeks. It's kind of, yeah, it's the one I get the most compliments on. And I'm proud of it. And I'm happy to say that when I oversaw its transfer. I hadn't seen it in a bunch of years, and then I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, I saw its transfer, oversaw a new transfer for the criteria. It came out on the
Criterion.
Criterion Collection. I thought, oh, this is not bad. Not
That's being very modest. And I got to say to the three of you, thank you very, very much for taking the time to do this conversation, to celebrate election, to celebrate 1999, the year that changed cinema. On behalf of myself and everyone watching, thank you so much for this amazing conversation and happy 25th anniversary election.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you,
Thanks so much.
Scott.